They did it, Chris. They did it. Finally. About effing time. That is all I've got to say as far as this goes. People, welcome to Mando Watch. And, oh, man, 2 weeks of bullshit was worth the wait because we finally have something to talk about. We're back. Myself, the movie nerd, the TV nerd, and the professor. Just the Battlestar this time. Hashtag Battlestar boss time.
Professor
Chris,
Patrick W. Huber.
What's going on, guys?
Dude, I'm doing great, man. You know, I always will have bad things to say about this show.
I know.
But I do have a lot of good things to say. I got to say, man, I'm excited to get into this one this week. Pat, man, how you doing, dude?
Hey, I'm going to say this is I basically watched the episode twice. I watched it in the morning, pretty much like a pre-work thing. And then I watched it after work. So, I had a whole day of fun to basically digest and get back into it. And what I will say is there's a lot of cool things that I'm excited about in terms of like Star Wars lore. But I will say, because I don't really have that background in watching some of the animated series and other content, that I wasn't really too excited about this episode. That's basically my impression. Like, I should have been excited. And there's a couple cool things that I'm looking forward to learning more about. But, I think the episode on its own was, sort of just okay.
All right. Well, we're going to have a lot to get into, to say the least, because, oh, man, it's insane to me. Like, I should have known that this was going to be one of those episodes when I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and was already seeing the post up on board. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like, it's official. The internet has officially replaced the city. It just does not sleep, like, at all. So...
Yeah, New York City's on a strict sleep schedule.
Yeah, it's just really. It's just
anymore.
everything's backwards. So, but we have the Mandalorian to celebrate, which is good. People, Chapter 11, The Heiress, directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, written by Diamond. Hold on, that's the first thing I have to talk about before we even actually get into the recap. Bryce Dallas Howard directed this episode. I
was
don't
very
know
surprised
I don't
about
know what
that.
to say as far as that goes. Like,
I literally just recapped the first season 2 nights ago. Refreshing myself on the episode she did, I was left with a weird taste in my mouth. She didn't quite do as good of a job as I had thought she did the first time around. So
it's astounding to me, to say the least. And also, I would say, before we get into it as well, that this is probably the first episode I've seen that actually deserves its hour-length time. And, I mean, I have to check because this was the only episode where I wasn't specifically keeping track of the episodes, but was this the shortest one yet? Or am I just bugging?
By far. It was like 35 minutes.
It was 35 minutes.
Yeah.
You're shitting me.
And you're talking about the credits and the photos at the end too.
Dude.
Like you're giving it like an extra 5 minutes.
True. I gave it a little bump there. I didn't even count. Not counting the concept art. I think this barely breaks 30.
Chris, we were talking about it literally 2 nights ago, and this is what Redemption was building to. This was everything that I've been wanting from forget from this season, which for the most part have been pretty lackluster up to this point. This has been everything that I've wanted from this show up to this point. Just finally, Mandalorians in the Wild West, smashing and grabbing and like getting together. People like this episode was so momentous because this episode, besides just being like a shot in the arm to just this season overall in this dreary year, this episode, to me at least, is probably going to be the most important episode going forward. And we'll get into that more so as we further on explore this episode. But we're about a couple minutes in. So, Chris, was there anything else that you wanted to get off your chest before we delve into the recap?
No, just welcome to Mando Watch, people. Let's get into it.
It's going to be insane. So, Chapter 11, The Heiress. Mando and the Frog Lady have reached their destination. It's Mon Cala. I didn't realize that. That should have been the first indication that this was going to be an episode worth remembering because we actually got a damn planet name. And it's actually a planet that we're familiar with. Mon Cala, the home of the Mon Calamari, which is one of the greatest alien names ever because it has the word calamari in it, even though the Mon Cala themselves are not actually squid. They're more like crustacean things. That's Admiral Akbar's species. So Mando, the child of the Frog Lady, touched down. The Frog Lady is reunited with her husband, and he's off in search of more Mandalorians. We see a quick shot of a shadow figure in the distance. We're not sure who she is, but we're led to believe that is indeed the first glimpse of somebody who will be referenced directly and named later on in the episode, that being, of course, the one and only Ashoka Tano. He goes into the bar. He asks the bar. Well, first he asks another Mon Cala to look after his ship, which, oh man, that ship is not in good shape. Those fighters did a number on that ship overall. And so he goes into the bar. He sits down. He orders some food for the kid because he sees the kid eyeball the eggs. He's like, no. We already caught a ton of flack for that last week. We can't go through that again. We're actually going to get you some real food this time. He asks the bartender, hey, so are there any Mandalorians around here? And he's like, yeah, sure. I know some Mandalorians around here. And he points him to another one of those squid things. I don't remember that specific alien name. He's like, sure, let's just go out of the water. Totally not suspicious. But, as this is the Wild West directly post Empire days, continuing overall with the theme of this show, it shows that, of course, I don't know what it is with people just like wanted to hurt the child. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sick of the child, I feel like, as everyone else, of just the blatant product placement. But it's like, come on. It's like every single chance somebody takes to try and kidnap this kid. And I'm like, it's just a galaxy, like just a bunch of like whisperers like this. Yeah, it's like they have no conscience. But anyways, but all of this is the setup.
Actually, Dom, they were trying to kill the kid and just take the armor. So like this is the first time the kid was about to die. It was
So you're proving my you're proving my point for me. Like all of these people want this kid. It's like, Jesus, we get it. It's a little Force user, but like at the very least, last season with the Empire that made sense. This season, it's like just a bunch of like random galaxy thugs just want it, and it's like, why? It serves you no purpose. But all of that is for shame because all of it is just building up to the arrival. People, we did it after 2 episodes. As I said, I kept hinting at it. The Mandalorians have arrived, and oh my God. So much satisfaction, so many answers to everything that I've been looking for, which is what is up with Mando's one sect? Where have the rest of the Mandalorians been? Why have the Mandalorians seemingly just been like spread out across the galaxy post the Empire taking them over? And people, we got our first main canon character who for the most part people recognize, Bo-Katan Kryze portrayed in, and this is also a momentous occasion because Chris, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that this is the first time where we've seen animated characters jump to live action before. Obviously, the first one being Saw Gerrera in Rogue One, but this is the first time that we've gotten a character an actor who voiced the character in the animated series actually pop up on the big screen. So that was just a momentous occasion.
100% is the first time. Looked it up. Certified. Talking TV certified. That's a fact.
This is a moment, people. Besides all of the other awesome things in this episode, this is a moment. So Mando, he did it. Finally accomplished his mission. And weirdly enough, Chris, I kind of knew that it was going to happen in this episode because if just following the exact structure of episode 1, we literally just broke it down 2 nights ago. Episode 1, intro. Episode 2, creature feature filler. Episode 3, we finally get to the action. And
I'm not hyped about that, but what we got today
we'll get into
makes me a little less. We'll get into it.
We'll get into that in positives and negatives. There's a lot that I still have to get through. So finally meets up, and I actually wrote down the characters' names because they were, again, I had to write them down, otherwise I would not know them. So next to Bo-Katan are Cosca Reeves and Axe Wolves, portrayed by Mercedes Vernado, aka the one and only Sasha Banks. I don't watch wrestling, so I wouldn't know who that was. I know everyone was making a big deal about Sasha Banks, and I'm like, I don't know who that was.
The champ, man.
I don't watch wrestling. Shut up. Anyways,
it's boss time.
And Simon Cassianidis. Again, I don't watch wrestling. I have no idea what you guys are talking about. You're speaking alien language right now. So they, of course, make that little deal because, again, it's Star Wars. Nothing can ever go straight-laced in a very obvious Empire ripoff. Yes, so that's going to be the talking point. So the Bill Burr episode, people, has officially been replaced by the Sasha Banks episode. Or, I don't know, actually. This episode, I feel like could go like in a multitude of different ways and directions. So, of course, they make their little deal. He needs to return the little guy to the Jedi. And they're like, we're trying to rebuild Mandalore, and well, you're a Mandalorian, so you want to help us? And he's like, yeah, it's not what I do, And then they're like, okay, fine. We'll tell you where the Jedi are if you help us take this one Imperial cargo hold. Which, again, story-wise, there's really not a whole lot of it's still like following like the episode of the week format kind of thing, but the scale overall is raised, the effects are raised, the action is raised, just everything in this episode is raised to another level, which again is why I am having such a hard time understanding how Bryce Dallas Howard directed this. Like, what? She went from directing the shitty Magnificent Seven episode of last season to this. Like, mind blown right now. Mind blown. And overall, And so ultimately, they go through their snatch and grab. They infiltrate the Imperial ship. They blasting their way through stormtrooper after stormtrooper. And Amanda leaves the child, of course, with the frog parents and literally having their own little Muppet show off to the side, off screen, just the way we like it. We already got too much of the Muppets over these last 2 episodes. So they frankly deserve their own screen time off screen, frankly, this episode. And so we saw the latest snatch and grab. They're trying to take over the ship entirely so that they can get more weapons, so that they can so that they can just get more advantages to their side in order to take back Mandalore. Yet again, we'll get into that later on in the show. And ultimately,
we all worst enemies.
And in addition to all of that, as if all of that wasn't enough, we also got more insight into the Empire with a quick pop-up from Bosch himself, Titus Welliver, as the captain of the Imperial ship. Gets a contact from Moff Gideon when he's revealing to him that the Mandalorians have infiltrated his ship, and Moff Gideon is like, your ship is not going to make it, so you know what to do. And he viciously shoots down the pilots, and just as the Mandalorians manage to make it to the ship hold, he shoots himself. The Mandalorians gain control of the ship, and after that is over, Bo-Katan turns to Mando and is like, hey, you want to come with us? And Mando's like, that's not what I do. I still have a job to finish. And she's like, all right, you did your part of the deal. You're going to go to Ashoka Tano on the planet Caladan. She's the last Jedi and the only Jedi that I know of. And when you see her, tell her that Bo-Katan sent you. And that's really, I feel like, all that's left important, because the rest of it is just like going to get the kid. And they're kind of reminding you what you missed as far as the Muppets go. And you're like, wow, I'm so glad that they like kind of rewarded us for having to sit through the Muppet show last week. What?
Tommy, you forgot the most important part of this episode.
If you mentioned that fucking worm swirl, I swear to God.
No. Hey.
That was important. Just because you missed it doesn't mean it wasn't important.
It's the bath toy prop that Yoda's playing with.
All right, you know what? You're right. That one I'll give you, because I did notice that. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, they really
for these rubber things. This is like real rubbery.
Whoever's managing the financial aspect of being a producer on this show really needs to like be on set more.
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on there. That was
did they go to the Dollar General or Family Dollar to get the bath toy for the
prop?
They
just painted it. They was like, it's bright yellow. How can we fix it? Don't worry, we got paint.
Well, just to make it clear, it's basically the child of the frog lady. One of them hatched and sort of makes a connection with Baby Yoda.
It kind of seems like we're already sort of transitioning into
we're transitioning it. That was the episode recap, so now we're going in positives and negatives. I've talked enough. I need a break. So you guys, what are your thoughts overall on this episode? Chris, I actually want to start with you this episode, and then we'll get into Pat, because Pat's already started to make his opinion rather clear here.
I'm already on his bad side.
Okay, sounds good. Well, so it's really unfortunate that everything that was super easy to predict in regards to the structure and the pace of how the show may be an exact carbon copy of season 1 is coming to life. I really don't like that. I don't appreciate that. I think it's a little safe and close to the belt. But with all that being said, it's kind of hard to critique this episode too harshly, because I really enjoyed all of the moments that we got. It had a fun charm to it, especially with the payoffs. I mean, Pat, I'm curious to get your take on this, because you didn't watch Clone Wars. Me, someone who watched the 9th season of Clone Wars, there's a lot there, tying a lot of knots. Of course, we get Bo-Katan. Of course, we hint at Ashoka Tano, which I actually thought that was a very poorly done usage of her name. I think it should have been a little more ambiguous. It's just like, why are you going to, show your hand that early? I mean, we're going to tune in regardless. There's nothing else on TV right now. And I just didn't think it was tasteful, but still, I'm excited to see her. And the positives far outweigh the negatives, so I'm sure we'll dissect and get more specific as things go on. But if we're just talking to my general overview, a lot more to like here than to hate. But of course, it's The Mandalorian, and there's still a few things to dislike.
All right, Pat, speak your truth before you're ultimately silenced.
I'll just do a quick thing. Is basically, I didn't watch anything, in terms of the Clone Wars or anything like that to get the backstory. And I remember texting Christian beforehand, like, this better be big. I need something like spectacular to really amp me up for the rest of the season. This is the time really to keep my interest. And, I think the 30-minute episode, keeping it short and sweet and really focusing on, bringing these other Mandalorians in. I just don't think it was enough. I think we needed more Moff Gideon. I think we needed just other elements sort of interweaved with the Mandalorian. So, although I think we got a well-written, and well-directed story here, and there's there's not much to fault with this episode. I just don't think it's enough. I think this show constantly is sort of holding back, and I don't know if that's just like, let's just give it a little at a time and keep the budget down. But I think ultimately you got to go big. Like, this is Star Wars, isn't it? The movies are big, the other content's big, and this is sort of just like, oh, we're going to give you a little bit at a time. And I think that's really where I was just sort of expecting more.
I completely understand where you're coming from. And my response to that is going to be this. Their excuse has always been to go big in the past. And obviously keeping in mind this is a television show and there's a TV budget, for them to still be able to accomplish this much on this small of a scale, always keeping in mind that, like, it's really weird. This is one of the few instances where I think this is where I'm aware of the scale. I'm always aware that it's small. I'm always aware that even with the tremendous amount of money that's put into this show, it's still not even close to a fraction of the budget that's put into the movies. And the fact that I'm enjoying this, just overall the experience of watching this show is more than like the combined experience of watching all of the movies, I think speaks to something. Now, as far as kind of this being the big moment to try and bring you in. So, Pat, real quick. So, obviously, we were joking before this whole thing started about kind of you feeling like there was a whole lot of backstory that you missed out on because you didn't watch the animated shows. I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more on that, because this is the thing that I've always tried to kind of understand when it comes to that perspective, because that perspective has come up a lot before. My whole thing with that is, I personally feel, and I'm only going based on this because this is something that Dave Filoni has said in the past, specifically with the last season of Clone Wars, is that even though he is aware of the tremendous fan base that has dutifully watched each and every single property that he's made, he doesn't go into these projects in mind with trying to continue overall the story as if it's one big narrative. He goes in to each individual episode trying to overall just make the best episode as possible and make it as if each audience member had never watched Star Wars before. I'm attributing the fact that people feel like they need to do homework just based on overall just the amount of media response in general, and just the overall just the fact that, again, I wake up at 5:00 in the morning today when this episode comes out. I'm already seeing articles pop up on my Google feed about all the connections of the Clone Wars and articles about the Darksaber. I'm just attributing it to clickbait and people just trying to get as many articles about because there's so little content to write about. But just as far as the kind of feeling the need, like you need to do homework, like, was that, I just want to like kind of gauge your and pick your brain as far as that goes, like if it was specifically just from watching this episode or if it was from extraneous sources.
Dom, like the only thing that I was really excited about is sort of this allusion to the Darksaber, and oh, does he have it? Blah blah blah. That sort of triggered me to go down a rabbit hole of sort of looking up what the Darksaber is and reading about it, and that's really my biggest excitement of the episode, was going down that rabbit hole and getting some backstory. Like, pretty much for the most part, it's like, the episode is, they arrive on the planet. He gets tricked again and duped and basically rescued by the other Mandalorians. That's when things start heating up, but it's like a slow burn. And then, it just, to me, you're talking about this giant action and all this stuff, and they get on the ship and basically, it's like the stormtroopers just drop like bowling pins. There's no real conflict. It's just sort of like they run right over them, and there's no real opposition. And I'm expecting a little bit of like, hey, let's get the Imperials to have like one up on Mando for the first time ever in this series. Like, I think a little bit in episode 7 of season 1. Like Moff Gideon had them pinned down in that bar. And that's like the best hand that the Imperials have had so far in this series. And I get nothing of that. I'm not on a roller coaster of, good versus evil. It's just sort of like the show's happening. And so, I know you're pretty excited about this episode, but, give me giant spiders, I guess, hey.
Clearly. Damn, you'd rather the giant spiders over
giant spiders are your jam. Giant spiders are your jam. That's got to be next week's hashtag.
I don't know. Maybe the worm would be better, but I don't know. It's just I think they underused the Imperials and what they could have done to really leave us on a cliffhanger this episode.
Okay.
You
So,
know,
Pat, if I'm understanding you correctly, because see, for me, having seen, obviously, we've all seen season 1, so I obviously have that want to explain the Darksaber more, and it's popped up in other areas of Star Wars canon as well. But so you felt like you really needed then, in other words, just to sort of put a pin on this, you needed the Clone Wars backstory to really get invested in everything that was going on. It didn't do it for you as someone who's a casual watcher in regards to this.
Well, I feel like recognizing, who these people are, definitely would have helped, getting that excitement of like, oh my God, these are characters that I enjoy. I'm getting introduced to them, and it's pretty much like, it felt pretty generic. Like they're just meeting other Mandalorians, and it's not really until the, what is it? Bo-Katan basically confronts Bosch, in the cockpit.
Yeah.
That you're really getting that connection to the past story, and really getting a sense of who she is. So it's like I wish there's a little bit more. Like I would, people will probably hate me for saying, but maybe a flashback would have been cool. Like I know that's a dangerous thing to bring up, but ultimately in TV, like, hey, just show us a little something extra.
I actually think that's justified because, although for me it's hard to say if it was, nonsensical considering I've seen the Clone Wars, so it's a little hard to think backwards, but I think they were a little vague about it, and I think the excitement of seeing the character of Bo-Katan, if you hadn't watched Clone Wars or read any of the comics or the extended universe type books, yeah, she's just kind of like another person who took her helmet off and pissed off the Mando, and so I can kind of, I guess I can see your disconnect there, but so it's just strange to me, man, because I just feel like it's either one of two things for me personally. It's either that I'm just so excited to finally get something that actually ties into the greater overall narrative that I'm being too lenient and too forgiving, or this episode was actually pretty awesome. And I'm leaning more towards the pretty awesome side.
Well, that's always the trick with Star Wars, right? Is the fact that you constantly are battling these smaller stories with the greater overall narrative. And the fact of the matter is we like to pretend that it is just these series of smaller stories, but that's not what TV is. At least that's not what TV has become. And that's part of the reason why I like the show. It's both my least favorite and my favorite element of it is the fact that it is 1 minute, it is the smaller, like off the beaten path, mission of the week episodes that seem to have nothing to do with the overall narrative and literally just seem to be distractions. And it's annoying because it's 8 episodes and we want every episode to matter. But then it pays off with episodes like this. And I feel like regardless of your overall connection to the story and regardless of your need to kind of educate yourself, I personally am not of the opinion that you need to educate yourself. I think the magic of Star Wars is the fact that you can jump in at any moment and you kind of can just appreciate what it is in the moment or not. But the whole thing of that is that I think the idea of kind of like wanting mission of the week versus wanting this kind of, the longer form narrative, I think is kind of antithetical to kind of what the show is going for, because I think that it's safe to say, Chris, you and I were already talking about it before. The show has established its formula. It kind of knows what it is. And even if it is predictable a bit, at the very least, we understand the structure of the show now. And now this is the moment that we have in order to finally actually get into the story of what the show is about, because the majority of the show has been so wrapped up in mystery up to this point that the fact that we're finally now getting something, I don't think it's a matter of, oh, we're just excited because we're getting something. It's a matter of, no, this is where the show is going. This is the logical next step in the story. We have a few of the pieces of the puzzle. Now we're getting more, and we will eventually get more as time goes on. It's just going to be up to each individual person in order to determine what kind of their level of sustention will be before they're like, okay, give me all the answers.
Yeah. So Dom, I have one question: is like, does this follow the first season strategy of sort of revealing Bo-Katan, and then all of a sudden we just wait till the final episode to really bring them back into the story? Like one of the things that
that might be a negative.
That's
the thing. That might be a negative. I'm not gonna lie, because again, we're very familiar with the season 1 structure. It would not surprise me if this is the last time we see them until the finale, or worse, this is the last time we see them for the rest of the season, which to me would be like an absolute worst case scenario if that was the case. But
and then my other question
you have to consider.
My other question is, if they shortened sort of a little bit of the spider stuff and then tack this episode onto the end of this, second episode, wouldn't that have been made a better episode? Like,
and that's the trick.
But
that's the trick.
That's one, and then you're good.
That's the trick, though, of this show, is that is not the structure of the show. As much as it kills me, and as much as it is, I think, to both mine and Chris's chagrin, again, for Chris, please let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth, but that is the problem, because that is what the show is. The show is very standalone in nature in its episodes, again, because it plays off of exactly... This is essentially what Filoni was doing with the animated shows. It is every episode, or batch of episodes rather, in that case, because that case was easier because, again, it was 23-minute episodes, so you could do more overall with the story, and the fact that they were batched together week to week. You could have just that much more flexibility, that much more story. And it's crazy for me to say that a 23-episode format is more flexible towards the story than an 8-episode format. That's baffling for me to say, but given I feel like just how constrictive the overall format of writing for this short amount of time is, and the fact that they are, I guess, for lack of a better word, my way of kind of compromising with it is the fact that they're confident in their end game, is the phrase that I'll use. They're confident in their end game, and they're confident enough that they've set up enough of the mythos with the show that they can keep going with it, that they can throw in a spider episode and then throw in an episode right after this. And as far as other positives go,
well, hold on. I have something to speak to that too before we sort of jump to something else real quick. I kind of wanted to throw a positive and a negative in the hat based off hearing your and Pat's back and forth there for a minute. So I think a positive is that I think it's apparent that the problems of the first season, some of the critics who are a little more harsher than sort of the mainstream, casual TV watchers, there was a lot of... It's not giving us enough. It's not painting in the overall Star Wars universe enough. And we've obviously heard the Kathleen Kennedy problems with the films. So I think you really can see the beauty and the positive reactions that come from Filoni and Favreau. Sure, they have their system of checks and balances at Disney, right? But you can really... I mean, knowing Filoni, especially from the Clone Wars and how he operates and the stories he's given us, he kind of feels... at least to me, like he has the mobility to do what he wants. So, and that's why I think this season is such a higher bar of quality. So yeah, we got, repeat placeholder episode 1, repeat placeholder episode 2, now repeat placeholder episode 3, but I think the bar's higher because to me it seems like the creators are actually able to function like other creators are under this Disney umbrella. So I think that is a positive, which is why I haven't been complaining as much. But I also think a negative, based off hearing what you guys are saying, is if they have this freedom, if all the articles and all the speculation are true and it's really the Filoni-Favreau show, and these guys love Star Wars as much as you and I, why are we kind of getting these mundane missions? And Pat, you're totally right. I mean, I think for you to come to that deduction in, casual conversation about, hey, wouldn't that have been better suited as maybe like an opening sequence to this episode? And it could have been another hour long. People seem to really like the debut of season 2. It's, for as clean as it's become, it's still so messy. And
I agree with
I
you.
Don't understand it.
I agree with you. Here's my counter to that. I specifically with the difference between season 1, just as far as the story goes, because as far as what you're saying with them kind of like being afraid to almost like kind of mix an experiment and make the episodes like different and kind of in essence like mixing multiple storylines, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not going to say I agree or disagree with it because, again, just because I don't like the format, it doesn't necessarily mean that it, to me, deters from the show. I think it deters from the show overall in the moment. But again, the whole idea is that just going back and seeing the overall, how each piece connects together. I think the biggest difference for me personally between seasons 1 and 2 is season 1 seemed to be having a story that it was going for, and then it came to almost seemed to come to a grinding halt with that middle section before it finally picked up again at the end. And by that time, it almost felt like an afterthought. That was my problem, specifically with the pacing of that first season. This season, and I'm hoping that this doesn't end up happening, specifically since we have reached that point now at the same time as last season, where around this time last season this was the last awesome moment before we moved into, to me, the slow trudging territory. So far, what I've noticed is immediately off the bat, that's different, starting from the first episode as opposed to last season, is that this season we're getting each episode is, for better or for worse, is a piece of the puzzle. Each episode, the Mandalorian has a set mission that is part of its overall goal of the season, which is something that I cannot say was there in the first season. The first season, he had the child, and it was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna bring him back to the client, but then I get guilty, so I'm gonna take him. And now I'm going to just go off and have a bunch of adventures. He didn't really seem to know what he was doing. And that's fine because, again, even though I may not personally like that, that's what the trajectory of the first season was. This season, however, it's very, very precise because he literally says it like every other minute. I'm searching for other Mandalorians so I can reunite this child with his kind. And that's going to require bringing in other Force users. And so far, even with all the problems that I've had, with each episode, I cannot say that the show has disappointed as far as clearing that overall objective. You know, like the character has an objective and he's going to see it through to the end. Literally to the point where when he meets obvious ploys for spin-off material, he doesn't fall victim to them, even though they easily provide for some way better sequences than anything having to do with that freaking puppet in his arms.
Doesn't it suck how much we reference, characters in this show as either plush dolls or marketing campaigns or spin-off material?
It does, but we have to acknowledge it for what it is. But we have to acknowledge it for what it is. That's the thing. And we're not idiots, and we're not typical people who just eat this stuff up. We call it out for what it is. It's fine because it's nothing new, to be quite frank. But it's also, it is what it is. So as far as that goes. As far as my negatives for this episode go, again, it's very, very few because, again, it's just my overall positives were taking out all lore. And I really am, I think, trying to distance myself from the lore as much as I was completely nerdgasming all over the place over Bo-Katan and finally seeing the Mandalorians and seeing some connections to the Empire and actually finally seeing a fucking trajectory for the show. I'm bringing out all the F-bombs here. I don't care. Finally seeing a trajectory for the show. This was the part, I will say, where the overall Mandalorian nature of it was, I think, a little bit distracting. And it's so funny because as awesome as the moments were, when the Mandalorians first came in, I'm like, man, they look so cool in animation. Why do they look like better versions of the Power Rangers when they're fighting? And it was so bad because I had to distance myself there. But I'm like,
I had a Power Rangers comment. I really did, truthfully did.
I hate my adult brain. I hate my adult brain doing that because I'm like,
it didn't come up for me.
I just want to get sucked into the action and I just want to enjoy it. And Pat, I understand exactly where you're coming from as far as the tension. Yeah, see, exactly that. Pat, I understand exactly where you're coming from with there seeming to be a lack of tension with just overall the Mandalorians seeming to crush the Stormtroopers. The only 2 points that I'll offer in opposition to that is one, Stormtroopers have always sucked. Literally look at them in any single one of the movies. It's not just this. These Stormtroopers have always sucked. Literally look at
I did enjoy the comment that one of the fellow Mandalorians that they were with, he was like, and they can't shoot for anything or something like that.
Exactly.
He wanted to say they can't shoot for SHIT, but he was just like, you know.
For as much as Filoni loves the clones, Filoni despises the Stormtroopers, and he makes it apparent in every single chance. I don't think he could have been more obvious with that than that opening scene in the finale of season 1 where it's the dumb Stormtroopers that get wrecked by the droid. The second instance where Stormtroopers get wrecked by a droid. The other instance there being that's just the nature of the Mandalorians. Like the other thing kind of, I feel like pride that I got, again, just taking out the lore itself is seeing what multiple Mandalorians in action look like. Like we got a little tease of that in the first season when the other members of, as it is revealed, the Watch Zealot spinoff did when they came to Mando's rescue at the end of the 3rd episode of that first season. And then we got it in this season, but the difference there is that was just an army of them just firing on them, like just like a typical, and it was cool to watch, but it was just like an army. This was choreographed. This to me is what sets the Mandalorians apart, and to me the reason why they kind of exist almost like this third sect in the universe in addition to the Jedi and the Sith. They are not Force users, but they are badass warriors. They use every trick and tool that they have in their trade that they can, and that's what they are. And so the fact that you have kind of this overall just like kind of weighed down bureaucratic nature that's trying to be evil, and you put it up against kind of a race that has literally dedicated their entire life to the art and craft of war in any shape, way, shape, or form. And that's what you're going to get. Like, it doesn't necessarily make for the best stakes, especially because, again, when it reveals that the Stormtroopers and the Empire just look like a fucking joke compared to them, but that's the case, It's like, I'm trying to think of a good real-life example, but, like, to me, there's a reason why in the first season of Game of Thrones, you never actually saw the Dothraki fighting anybody, both A, primarily because of budgetary restraints, but also B, because if you did, it would be like, what's the point of watching this? It's the equivalent of watching the Dothraki mow down the Lannisters in the 7th season of Game of Thrones. You're pitting people who are just regular people that are paid to fight versus people who have trained their entire life for this kind of stuff. And that's just going into kind of just the Mandalorians as a species overall. Like they're like, forget the Clone Wars. There were books and video games and all sorts of other stuff just about like how they participated in the ancient Jedi and Sith wars. And again, there were even bits and pieces that they referred to in the Clone Wars, like when Bo-Katan said to Ahsoka, when they imprisoned Darth Maul, they're like, yeah, this is a relic of a bygone era, back when we actually had reason to worry about you force-wielding maniacs, But she said that almost with like an air of charm to them, because it's almost like she would relish the opportunity to fight something like that, because that's what Mandalorians are. That's what they do. They live for that sort of challenge. And seeing that dichotomy between these characters and Mando, who for the most part is just kind of this shadowy, preferring to stay away from the main periphery bounty hunter, which we understood from the flashbacks of his character in that first season, I think is really, really fascinating. But also see it how they can kind of...
Can I just say, I think you're giving it way too much credit. That in concept, yes, I agree with all that. But the execution that we got was far from being as beautiful and as poetic as I wish it was. I'm with you on that. I loved Clone Wars. I loved the Mandalorian lore. I loved everything about those last 4 episodes of the first Clone Wars season. But this still kind of felt like a Saturday morning TV show.
And in that sense,
I don't think it's as poetic and as beautiful as you described it, although I really want it to be.
Well, in that sense, I'll give it to you. But again, in that sense, I just give that to the budget. I just give that to the budget. It's, as much money as they put into this, they're still not at a point where they can make this as awesome as they want. And
I thought about that, but I also felt that it was, I don't want to say a lack of tact, because these people have been creating for a long time, but maybe it's them in live action, and they still need to learn how to nuance it and sort of massage it in the directions that it needs to go to be more impactful. You can get away with a lot more in animation. You can make it more grandiose and bigger in scale. And so I think there's that learning curve here, especially for Filoni, right? Who this is his first time dabbling into live action. But Pat, man, you've kind of been a little bit of a bystander here, and me and Dom go back and forth. Where's your head at with all this stuff?
I can't stop thinking about how bad that shot was when basically the squid chowder was eating up Baby Yoda, and Mando goes in with his knife.
Face huggers. What was with the face huggers in this episode? It's almost like they can't themselves.
But did you guys see that the knife was like 10 inches away from the squid?
Yeah,
and it didn't actually puncture the squid, and it killed it.
Yeah,
that was quite weird.
Into the bowl.
It's amazing. That's the one thing I will say.
It's really strange, but it does get paired with the best line, which is don't play with your food. Which I really enjoyed. I thought that was a great comedic moment for the Mando.
They sprinkled these little moments in, and they either really work or they really don't. And that's kind of some of the negatives that I do have with it, which is, again, I'm sorry, the Muppet stuff. Just Pat, you've officially won me over as far as that goes. With wow, especially after all the action that we get, it's like, wow, just the Muppet stuff that we're getting here. I'm like, wow, okay, this is becoming even more pain. It really does. I don't know, but just because they are aligning their budget into all the action and the spectacle, that the Muppets are becoming kind of more obvious, because there were obviously less of them in the first season because it really was just the kid. But even then, it's there were definitely a lot more good animatronics put into the kid than in this season, with they're clearly carrying him around just so that they can show up. It's like, hey, buy your Baby Yoda doll today.
Yeah.
I will say that I understand the puppet stuff, and I'll say that the people that are actually working on them and getting them into the show are doing a fantastic job. It's just I personally just can't suspend my disbelief of that puppet just moved like shit. Sorry.
And you should be able to.
And for good reason. For good reason. I totally agree with you.
I was going to be on my good behavior and not do expletives. But
I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
So yeah, Pat, we kind of, Dom and I, obviously, we're a little more keen to this episode, a little more welcoming, because we've seen that second season of the Clone Wars. It didn't quite, or the 9th season of the Clone Wars, sorry. It didn't quite work for you.
I love how you've said both seasons and none of them are right. It's the 7th season. There are 7 seasons.
Oh, you're right, the 7th. I'm getting it all confused.
You've said that multiple times, and I'm like, oh, first the 9th and the 7th. This is rather amusing. I want to see how many times more times he can do it before he finally gets the right number season.
I'm just gonna go with the final season. That would make it easier for everyone.
That's just the easiest to go with.
But so Pat, someone who's kind of not cold turkey coming into the Star Wars universe, but hasn't seen as much as Dom and I in preparation for this. Did you have any more sort of positives and negatives before we jump into the MVPs for the week?
Not really. I think I enjoyed the episode, I said, but obviously I wanted more. That was sort of the big negative for me, is just wanting more. But it was a sound episode. It was sort of, to me, like a transition episode from sort of those kind of missions of the week, and now maybe we're getting into the story. But I do have the concern that, now that we've introduced this, we're just going to go to a different planet and a different story, and it's not going to be as tied in. I'm still waiting for that sort of major storyline. I feel like, am I going to get it in season 2? Am I going to get it in season 3? Am I ever going to get it in the show? Of what is really at stake here? Obviously they're holding back. We don't know what the child really means, and there's going to be a giant payoff with the child. But is that like, the end, the last episode of the series? Like at some point, the shoe's got to drop on what the child is going to do. Like, is it sort of gonna power the 4th Death Star? Like what's up? So I'm curious to find out what's happening, and I sort of want more of this direction faster. With that, I think I like the guest stars. Like I'm a big fan of the show Bosch, so Titus Welliver is pretty awesome.
Also, the Man in Black from Lost.
Yeah,
I'm not a Lost person, but
Chris is.
It was a while since I've seen him in something.
Yeah, so many things I can't keep track of. Deadwood too.
Sasha Banks does a good job, sort of breaking her wrestling mold, and of course Katie Sackhoff, of pretty much famed sci-fi, Battlestar Galactica, the obviously the second series of it. And, also in, other shows, not just sci-fi, but really just a good actor overall. I think that's a fantastic choice, to bring into the Star Wars universe. And I really hope that character really plays a part throughout the season, not just the final episode.
Man. I hope she's not. I hope it's not what Dom says. I hope she's not just spin-off fodder. I really hope that they can do something with this show. I hope this isn't the show that they just use as the gateway to all the spin-offs where we actually get something
and
worthwhile.
That's the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about before we get into MVPs, because again, I love this episode a lot, but I feel like we truly are at a crossroads of destiny moment, for lack of a better word, which is where either the next episode we know for a fact, whether it's in the next episode or the following. I heard a ghastly rumor that I hope is not true, but most likely will be true, which is that next episode, because the ship is in such bad array, it crash lands and we get another creature feature before we actually get to Ahsoka in episode 5, because I hate that I said it, because now that's most likely going to happen. I'm sorry, Chris, but I had to say it before we actually got spoiled next episode. I'm hoping to God it doesn't happen. I'm hoping to God it doesn't happen.
I know what the next episode is, and Christian, you're gonna love this. The name of the episode is called Twin Brother, and the Mando goes back to Tatooine, and your favorite character had a twin brother, and it's another guild mission.
Oh Jesus!
Of course it is.
Yeah,
and that wouldn't surprise me.
That wouldn't surprise me at all. Like he crash lands on like. Well, I mean, Chris, we hit the desert planet, we hit the ocean planet, we're gonna get a forest planet at some point.
Hey, I really enjoyed this new city port town. I really thought it was
Mon
even
Cala.
cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
And you guys noticed. I mean, they actually sailed on the boat.
Yeah.
Normally it's like hovering or something. That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, the harbor, the whole harbor zone, and like the special way they're supposed to enter and exit the whole planet. I think that was some pretty cool storytelling stuff. And what I would say is, hey, if they're going to do spin-offs, let's do that chowder bar and make it like a Cheers-like series in the Star Wars universe.
You would love that. You would love that.
I'm so about that.
You would love that.
That's amazing.
If it happened. But what I was saying before,
on the Home and Garden channel or something.
But what I was saying before with the Crossroads of Destiny moment is that either. I mean, look. I think it's safe to say that if and when we do get Bo-Katan back, if her and the Mandalorians do come back this season, it will not be until the end of the season. I think that's pretty safe and confident for us to say. And as far as other projected go, I'm really hoping that doesn't happen, and I'm hoping that we do actually get the next. I'm hoping we actually do get Ahsoka in the next episodes, that we don't have to wait. But consider the fact that Carl Weathers is, and again, this is just the fact of who's directing. I know for a fact Carl Weathers is directing the next episode, and then Dave Filoni is directing episode 5, just like he directed everyone's favorite episode from season 1, The Gunslinger, with Jake Cannavale. Chris, I wish you had a picture queued up of him. Never gonna stop making fun of that guy on this show. Toro Pelican. But
you guys gotta back it off. Come on.
Yeah, but
be
the one
easy
thing I
on
will
this guy.
say is that you are right, Chris. I do hope that regardless of what happens for the rest of this season, I'm hoping that like you said, kind of the reconquest of Mandalore. I'm hoping that we see that in this show and that they don't use this as the backdoor pilot in order to launch the actual Mandalorian spinoffs, because that's going to piss me off, because just me personally as a fan, and this is where I will let my fanboy nature come in, as far as like, because before I think I was doing a pretty good job of ignoring the lore, just kind of taking the episode for what it was. In that sense, I'll be really pissed, because then I'm going to be like, this makes me feel like I was wasting my time with watching Mando with this bullshit, like, piece of product placement here, Force sensitive. And also I'll be like, why wasn't this show that we got to begin with? Because I'm like, because the thing that I loved is that, specifically, I think the very smart thing that Rebels did, and again, it's animation, it's always easier to do this in animation, but Rebels brought back characters from the Clone Wars, but they never made them front and center, and they never used them as fodder for spin-off material. They still factored them into the story, and they all played their part in order to further that story to its natural conclusion. And I'm hoping that that's what they do here, because we do, and I'm a little bit optimistic that they will do that, because there was a precedent for that, but at the same time, it's Disney, and this is kind of the future of Star Wars as we know it, so who knows? So,
unless that got dark, man, because I didn't think anything could be worse than this guy on your left-hand side right here. But Dom, if that happens, man, I mean, geez,
that would be really sad. That would be really, really sad. And I made my opinion about the spinoffs known as far as that goes. But we got to crown an MVP, Chris. We got to crown an MVP.
Yeah, well, before we do that, I just think it'd be a nice little way to cap off the segment based off like the way our conversation went. Just real quick, like I'm gonna ask you guys, just in or out? Are you guys in or out for the future now that we've seen 3 episodes?
For right now, I'm in. Again, because I only go based off the episodes that I've just seen. So for right now, I'm in. I will only be out when I'm out. But for right now, I'm in.
What about you, Pat?
Oh man, his Dark Materials is starting up season 2.
Yep.
I don't know. That might
That's
be
on
my
Monday
go-to.
night. That's on Monday nights. You have a full like 3 days in between.
Yeah, I guess I could still squeeze this one.
Exactly.
In, but,
exactly.
I'm not saying we won't keep doing this week to week. I'm just sort of
don't make it like that.
Yeah, we're in for this week to week. I just wanted to know if you guys were feeling it's going to be more of a slog or not. So it seems like we're all I'm on the inside, but hesitant.
Look, the one thing I'll say is, look, we already sat through season 1. So if we're in for another slog, like at the very least, we know we can take it. I'll be disappointed, but I know we can take it. So now we're getting to it. Let's crown an MVP of the episode.
Crown an MVP.
I mean, mine is obvious. I don't know if you guys will like actually just go the obvious route and like make this one easy for me. If you like, will be the kind of the sarcastic trolls that you are. I'm going Bo-Katan. It's Bo-Katan easily. She came in, she stole the show. I'm a sucker for redheads. It was great seeing Katie Sackhoff back. It was great seeing just like, even though it still looked a little bit ridiculous, just the armor translating across. It was still just great to see. Just it was good to see her again. It was good to see her again. I'm gonna go full fanboy here. I don't care. She was never necessarily one of my favorite characters in the show, but kind of just like seeing that continuity, seeing that consistency across the board, and seeing just that Filoni is loyal to his characters. And I'm glad to see Bo-Katan having been kind of like added to like the micro canon of characters that he's like given a lot of props and a lot of characters. That being Ahsoka Tano, Captain Rex, Darth Maul, Hondo Banaka, a bunch of different characters that he's given so much iconography, all the new cast members and characters that he brought in Rebels, all of the different characters. And I'm glad to see the Bo-Katan is still on that list. And I'm very interested to see where we go both with her character and with the other legacy characters that they bring into the show going forward. So for me, it's Bo-Katan. Easy.
Yeah. Pat, you want to take this one next?
Oh yeah, this one was really, really hard for me. Like, I will say the MVP of the episode, like, my first choice, and this is not ultimately my final choice, was basically Hillary Clinton, because the Mandalorians used the phrase "stronger together," her 2016 campaign slogan, and I was like, oh my god, they have the blue, they have everything.
For me, for you guys to actually just pick a straight answer for once. Far be it for me to actually expect that from you.
I'm joking, Dom. The real winner was the actual recap, the opening of the episode.
All right,
they reminded us that the helmet coming.
Oh my god!
All right, that'll give you. That was good.
Anyway,
that was nice. Zinger.
So
I will say this is the first episode I actually watched the recap for, and I'm like, oh man, I need that.
And the spiders came back in.
Anyway, and I got to see them again.
I'm pretty sure, I'm joking around because I agree with you. Katie Sackhoff, Bo-Katan is the winner, adding another sci-fi show to her belt of just like famed sci-fi. If you haven't checked Katie out in Longmire, the deputy of
my parents have
that show. She's fantastic. Just overall, like, MVP actor of all time. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a big statement, but definitely brings credence to this show, and stole this episode, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Nice.
and so for my MVP, I think there's only one real MVP of this episode, and it's, of course, Bo-Katan.
Banks.
Because
good.
for the
Bo-Katan.
first
Oh my God,
time...
wow.
Oh, no, I mean, Sasha Banks, she's cool. She's the world champion. She has her own. She doesn't need my help right now.
You know
Neither
why?
does Katie either.
The hair is muted in that picture. The hair is like intentionally muted. Like I remember when I watched the episode, it was like, yeah, that was a very, very sharp shade of red. So
Yeah. I don't know. It's just probably the color grade that these people have to put on it not to get copyright striking on their blogs. But anyways, I thought she was, for the first time, and it's probably because she's played the character just in a different style, a different approach. The cameo that didn't feel forced. I was like, thank God we got one of these. Direction came through, and she doesn't feel like she's just either there for a paycheck in Bill Burr's case, or just clearly underqualified in the case of who we will not bring up on the screen again.
I've already mentioned his name way too many times.
Yeah, and look, I love Battlestar Galactica, and it was really cool. It was really cool to see that. So of course it's her.
Of course, Bo-Katan, portrayed by Katie Sackhoff, the MVP of episode 3, the Heiress. Now, quickly, our last segment, people. It's sad. I always feel like this episode gets shunted to the side, but it is important. We need to talk about it, especially with this episode. The effects on the galaxy, the overall, how this contributes to the Star Wars saga overall. So the good thing is that we already talked about, I feel like, a majority of this in our positives and negatives. So to me, I feel like the only big thing that I have to talk about here is the fact that, Pat, you were talking about the last couple weeks about, like, yeah, when are we going to get more of the Darksaber? And I was on your side. I'm like, yeah, I want more of the Darksaber. We got that tease at the end of season 1. When is it actually going to come out? And we got that in this episode. Bo-Katan, she announced her goal. She's after the Darksaber, which was given to her famously at the beginning of Rebels season 4. Sabine Wren, who recruited it from Darth Maul after he attempted to recruit Ezra Bridger to his side in Star Wars Rebels. She got it from him, was trained by Kanan in the ways of the Jedi, so that she could begin the process of reuniting her people, but she herself felt that she was not a proper leader. Enter Bo-Katan, who was a legacy character from Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the sister of Duchess Satine, who was a lover of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who tragically died at the hands of Darth Maul. Bo-Katan then helped recruit Ashoka Tano and Captain Rex in liberating her home planet of Mandalore the first time from Darth Maul. Unfortunately, the planet fell in the finale of the Clone Wars. Unfortunately, Mandalore once again fell back under control of the Empire once the Empire reign began. And so we saw Sabine helped begin to spearhead that effort by giving the Darksaber to Bo-Katan at the beginning of season 4 of Rebels. And that was it. That was the last time we saw of her. And so now this time, again, it sucks because there's a lot of stuff that still happened off screen that we're not familiar with, but we do know for a fact that Mandalore is still, for the most part, under Imperial control. Again, because this is right after Return of the Jedi, there are still a lot of pockets, a lot of segments of the galaxy that are not quite sure whether they're Rebel controlled or Empire controlled. Mandalore looks like it's still one of those spots that is hotly contested, but Bo-Katan needs the Darksaber in order to reunite her people, because the Darksaber is a legacy idol as far as the Mandalorian culture goes, with it being constructed by the only Mandalorian Jedi and kept in the Jedi Temple for years until the Mandalorians actually got it back during the Clone Wars. And obviously, it ties back to Moff Gideon, who is clearly using it in some capacity to kind of further his control over the Mandalorian space. So even though, again, it's not much, but it does give us a little bit more as far as Moff Gideon goes, as far as, okay, even though nothing was explicitly said, it is shown that, like, he is kind of trying to get back together some remnants of the Empire, obviously with that phrase that he offers to Bosch at the end of that episode, long live the Empire. Yeah. And obviously the Darksaber has something to do with that. And I feel like that is going to go a long way as far as the future of the show goes. At least I hope.
So basically what you're saying is this show has been built upon the foundation of a solid story. We're just waiting to get it.
Correct.
And so I'm actually going to put my professional career on the line here and
Wow.
make a bold prediction.
Okay, all
because
right.
I know for a fact this is going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'm going to look like a fool, and I'm going to deal with that.
All right.
So,
all right. As long as you know it.
That's fine with me.
All right.
That's totally fine with me,
All right.
because
I'm
I have
gonna hold
a
you to
hunch, and I got to follow it.
I'm
So you
gonna
guys
hold whatever
remember
it is,
when...
I'm going to hold you to this.
You remember when they're in the cockpit of the Imperial ship, and Bo-Katan has the commander up at knife point, and she says, if you give me the information, I'll let you live. He says, that's fine, but he won't let me live. So I've been thinking to myself,
oh boy,
who could he be? because unlike Ahsoka Tano's name, they didn't say that outright. They kept it mysteriously. And of course, you're thinking, well, of course he's not going to tell enemy combatants who he actually is. But you also have to think that these enemy combatants might have an idea of who he is in the first place. So for him to not come up, I was kind of thinking, who could he be? And I remembered early on when Star Wars was first purchased by Disney, there was rumblings of this man having his own show. And then I remember there was a very well shot, you guys should go check it out, fan film made that was like a spec pilot that they tried to, and they really did for a while, have people believing that this was going to be the show we were all hoping.
Where is this going?
And I'm going to say it right now. Darth Maul is going to be in this show at one point or another. Maybe not this season. Maybe we'll get like a hand or something. I can already tell you it's not going to happen.
I'm sorry to do this. I'm sorry to cut you off here. I'm sorry. I know it's a bold prediction.
Because we know the Sith never die, and he is he. Darth Maul is he. It only makes sense with all of the backstory in regards to Mandalore and how Darth Maul has such a vested interest in that planet. All the stars were aligning for this to be the case. And if that actually happens, this would be the one fan servicey thing that I'd be so okay with because we never get enough Darth Maul.
First thing I'll say, were you okay with his cameo at the end of Solo?
Yeah, I loved it. Okay. I'm such a sucker for him. I can't help it.
The only thing I will say as to why you're wrong, at least again, I could be totally wrong. This is the moment where I put out myself on the line, and I could be totally wrong because Maul died for the second time in Rebels, which obviously, as you know, took place before A New Hope and Rogue One. And this is well after Rebels. That. And as of right now, who knows what could happen for the future, but as of right now, Filoni has indeed confirmed that Obi-Wan killing him for the second time on Tatooine when he tracks him down in Season 3, Episode 20, Twin Sons. You tricks Ezra into tracking him down because that's all he wants. That's all he wants is to find Obi-Wan. He realizes his attempts to foil and take over and seize power have completely failed, and all he has left is this one misguided attempt to find and kill Obi-Wan, and he does it. And Obi-Wan, it was in my top 10 lightsaber fights. I put it in my top 10 lightsaber fights. Obi-Wan kills him in 3 strokes. 3 strokes because he's not facing prequel Obi-Wan anymore. So, and if he survived that, I mean, look, he survived getting chopped in half the first time. So it wouldn't be the most ridiculous thing to say. But
I don't think he's dead. I didn't watch Rebels. I didn't know that. That makes me maybe take like a half a step backwards, but then I quickly step forwards again and asserting my claim that I think he's going to be in the show. Because I think in the new Star Wars universe, it's like Jon Snow, man. Like he's never really going to die at this point.
I completely understand. But the one thing I will say to keep in mind is before pre-Game of Thrones Sandlot rules, legends never do die, even if their physical body dies. The one that also goes true for Jedi and to a certain extent Sith. And the other thing I will say is that the reason why I think it's true from a thematic standpoint, forget the physicality of it, is the fact that when Maul dies, when Obi-Wan slices him, because the only reason why Obi-Wan actually even fights him, Obi-Wan's not going to fight him until Maul brings up the idea that Obi-Wan's protecting someone. He's like, why would you come here to this planet of all places, not to hide? No, you're protecting something. That's when Obi-Wan turns on his lightsaber, and that's when it goes down. And then, again, executes him in 3 strokes. And then before Maul dies, he asks Obi-Wan, is he the chosen one? And Obi-Wan says he is. And Maul says, so he'll avenge us both because we were both screwed over by Palpatine. And then he dies, supposedly for the last time. So that is, again, I'm sorry to burst your bubble there, dude, because trust me, I
don't believe it.
Yeah,
I don't believe it.
I also think Christian,
you raise great points.
All right,
Christian, I think you missed
funny as hell,
a little bit of the dialogue. They're talking about the Darksaber and does he have it, right? And we know from the final shot in season 1 that he has the Darksaber.
You're saying Moff Gideon. I calculated this. I think that this show thinks that
this is
because they've been so dumb.
Your brain, I love it.
And because they've treated us like babies the whole time while watching this, that's the obvious go-to. And I actually trust Filoni so much that I think he's going to pull something crazy. I think he's going to avenge George Lucas in the whole Jar Jar was the Sith Lord thing. I think he's going to try and do something like that because he respects the creator, unlike Kathleen Kennedy and the rest of them. So that's why I think this is going to happen.
Well, I think you might be right with a bigger reveal, but I kind of wish the setup was a little bit better if that's the case. Like it doesn't feel at all like it's going to happen, and maybe that is sort of the keeping us in the dark type of thing until it takes place. But it's one of those things where I think you have to sort of give a little more clues or expand the world. Like we haven't really seen any Sith in the series so far, and I guess we're about to see our first Jedi coming up in an episode or 2. or maybe 3. You know, who knows how long?
Who
it takes
knows
them
at
to
this
get there.
point? But so we just saw Chris's conspiracy theory brain on this show. Good God, Chris! All I'm gonna say there is, I hope you bring it back for more, because that was entertaining as hell. Both to debunk you and prove you wrong, but also potentially prove myself wrong. Because as I said, who knows? Because oh man, I think you're just grasping at straws because you've been so disappointed at the show that you just want some completely parallel, alternate, crazy version. Which again, I can't entirely blame you for. That's the one thing I will say. So before we get into like the final thoughts, I just wanted to read some quotes from my brother that he put in my family's group chat. I don't usually share it, but these quotes were just so amazing that I just had to share them. So my brother Mateo texted, "Imagine not having seen the Clone Wars, so you don't understand how crazy the latest episode of The Mandalorian is." Then afterwards, my brother-in-law stated, "Have you seen Tremors 4 like that?" I was convinced he was an episode behind because I think he was talking about the spider episode. And then my brother-in-law was like, "Are we talking about the show where Brent Spiner spends his whole life trying to become human with the guy from Jurassic Park?" And then afterwards, his wife, my sister, said, "Is Star Wars the one with the little wizard boy?" And some of the other comments include, "Does James Earl Jones guest star as the ghost of Mufasa against Jeremy Irons and Jim Cummings, who weirdly play the same part no one notices? Oh goodness, it is a Star Trek Star Wars crossover." Those are just some of the latest in the Rizzy family group chat message. That is the stuff that we have to deal with on a daily basis. So I guess before we get into final thoughts on this, or closing thoughts on this, star ratings, 4.5 out of 5 for me. Easy. 4.5. This is the best episode, and this is the first great episode to me since the finale of season 1. And it's, again, I'm going to be really mad if it jerked me around, but for now, this does have me excited for the future of the show.
Yeah, 4.5 out of 5 for me as well. Same reasons as you.
Yeah, I think I can continue with my DEF CON metaphor that I started in the previous thing.
Continuing trends, all sides of a good show.
I think we're moving down to DEF CON 3 on this one.
All right, DEF CON 3. We have not reached DEF CON 1 yet, though, so no British Bake Off yet.
Yeah, exactly. So
the
main thing is, I feel like I really want to like this episode. I really do dig the kind of quest for the Darksaber and the Mandalorian, potential that's there. I want to see it already. I don't want to wait. So until my life is over, the Dawson's Creek theme there. But the main thing is, let's just get it done. Like, why wait? For the rest of the season, you had a 30-minute episode, and it could have been 50 minutes, and you could have packed it through full more stuff. That would have been a little more exciting. Like, hey, listen, why don't you show how Moff Gideon got the Darksaber? That's probably a good story. Are we saving that for a whole entire 40-minute flashback story later on in the season? Would this show even do something like that? Because it hasn't done it before. Take us out of the Mando sort of point of view and bring us somewhere else in the universe. I think that's something that science fiction does a lot, but will they be willing to take that risk in this show? And I have my doubts. I think we're just going to sort of get the same formula that we got from season 1, and that kind of scares me. So
yeah,
Pat, I can tell you why, man. It's simple. It's because this is the way. Unfortunately,
this is the way.
Pat Filoni and Favreau are running this show. Now, let me just ask Pat one last thing.
Just remember, Pat, patience is the way to the light side of the Force. Impatience leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to the dark side.
And just because we have the, I'd say at this point in the show, the privilege where other shows don't have someone who hasn't watched Clone Wars. Pat, has this episode, before we jump out of here and say our farewells to the audience and, of course, to each other, Pat, do you want to go and watch at least the final season, the 7th season of the Clone Wars after seeing this episode, or no? Where's your head at with it?
It's I was not expecting to watch the Clone Wars beforehand. After this episode, it's maybe possible.
Okay.
Ooh,
interesting.
It'd be interesting to see how old are you? What, 36, 37?
Yeah, we're roughly around there.
It'd be interesting to see a man your age watching an animated show that is actually made for kids, but with some very adult subject matter. Be very, very, very interesting. That's what we're gonna leave this episode off with. People, thank you once again for tuning into the latest episode of Mando Watch. This episode was just as wild and crazy as I thought it was going to be. I knew the minute that I finished watching this episode. It's so funny. Literally, no joke, I measure the quality of these episodes to the quality of the episodes of the show, and I knew this was I don't want to say that we peaked yet because I'm still hoping that the finale is just as gangbusters, if not more gangbusters. But don't let my preemptive statements make anything. That's Chris, the TV nerd. That's Professor Pat Huber. I am Dom, the movie nerd. We are on Mando Watch, our council here on Talkin' TV. That's right, people. We put up content every Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays because we are here to service you, the people, during these dark times of quarantine. We've got top 10 lists. We've got watch-alongs. We've got big events. We've got celebrity interviews, so much more, and even more crazier content coming down the pipeline. So if you want to get more content like that, leave a like and a subscribe and a comment on each of our videos. Make sure to click that little bell right there next to the subscribe button. That way you get notified every single time we put up new content. Look at all of that content that we have for you guys. And we're also on social media. Chris, where can the good people find us on social media?
That is true, Dom. We are anywhere that matters at Talkin' TV Podcast. That's Talkin' spelled Talkin, no G. Right there. There you go.
Absolutely. Definitely. And people, once again, thank you for tuning in to another fantastic episode of Mando Watch. Facebook, Instagram, at Talkin' TV Podcast. See you guys next week for episode 4. This is the way, and watch more fucking movies and TV.
Follow Pat at Patrick W. Huber.
Yeah, and I'm going to go watch more Titus Welliver because it's Bosch
That's
time.
That's the close off line. We have standards here. Follow it.
I know.
Hey,
It's Bosch time.
Plug,
it's pretty
man.
good. Come on. It's Bosch time. I'm going to go watch
Bosch time. Have a good night, guys.
Bosch time.